Jake from Health, thanks so much for being a part of the Working Songwriter podcast. Man, a lot of the people that we have on this show are like roots musicians who play with acoustic instruments and stuff like that. And their origin story is always about them at like an open mic, getting started at a particular club. And I thought, researching you for this show, that you'd have a very different origin story, but it turns out I might be wrong. It's kind of similar. You had a venue like this in your life growing up in Los Angeles, this iconic DIY venue called The Smell. Can you talk about your early years and specifically what impact that venue had on your musical trajectory?
Yeah, so, actually, even toggling back a little bit before that, in college, I started playing guitar when I was like maybe 12 or 13 and was completely absorbed with it for a couple of years. And then it was subsumed by skateboarding and snowboarding, and I kind of gave it up until I
Hmm.
started playing in college. And when I played again, I actually just played acoustic. And
Really?
yeah, I played extensively on acoustic and sort of developed my sort of style completely sort of self-taught. And that's how I taught myself how to sing and play at the same time, etc. And I have like a gentle sort of high tenor voice that I think that ultimately affected, even though I ended up in the sort of noise and underground scene. I grew up on punk rock. I knew I wasn't going to be able to scream or do any sort of like Devo bark howl kind of shit that was really the hallmark of a lot of the bands that came out of the underground scene that we were a part of. And the venue you're talking about is the Smell, and it's still there, amazingly, considering how much downtown Los Angeles has gentrified in the time that's elapsed. But it's in an alleyway, um, between Second and Third Street, off of like Main, like right downtown, and it was just LA at that time. The downtown area was kind of just a forgotten, um, empty, you know, urban hellscape slash paradise for young artists, musicians. I think that it was, reflective of that, or emblematic rather, of a dying um strata of like American urban creative life that is just dwindling more and more, where you could have affordable housing and service industry type jobs where young people could live basically at poverty line and then like actually afford to rent an apartment and live together and spend all their time making cool shit. And
Hmm.
now cities like Los Angeles, San Francisco, New York, Seattle, the it's all just become like London or Dubai or some shit where there's plenty of interesting tourist things to go and visit, but there just isn't really that much possibility. It's just so difficult to live. But when we were there, yeah, there was this venue that was it was our kettle and fish for like Greenwich Village in the Beat
Yeah.
Generation. It was just that
Yeah.
that's where we all went, and it was the sort of throbbing heart of all these underground bands. And there was satellite underground venues around the east side and downtown as well. Um, basically like raw warehouse spaces that
Hmm.
hosted, and and we knew it was really special, because we did some DIY underground touring like of the United States, and sure enough, it was special enough that it became sort of a press focus in the international music press, and that is what allowed us to have a career. Just being in there, so much of it, and I think any musician really that is self-reflective will tell you that, like, if you get asked like, "Oh, what's your advice?" It's like, yeah, work hard, or talent is important, sure, but a lot of it is also being in the right place at the right time. And we were there right when the spotlight got sort of shifted in the direction of our scene, and it afforded us the chance to tour the world and play big festivals and be on a real record label, and then ultimately shifted into being a career. But yeah, it all came out of this very insular community scene focused around one grassroots venue.
When did your sound shift from, you said that you kind of learned in a kind of traditional way on acoustic guitar, learning to sing and play at the same time. You were into punk stuff. When did your sound kind of start to change into that noise rock that you're now known for, especially on your first album? That's like a big shift. I can hear the singer-songwriter stuff in later albums, but especially that first album was a big shift.
Yeah, so it's interesting is that I'm at core definitely a melodicist, and I love tautly constructed songs and pop hooks. I always have. Um, and that's one of the things about punk rock is that a lot of great punk rock is like the real genesis of it is like stripped down rock and roll, or like you look at something like the Ramones or Misfits, it's doo-wop,
Yes,
which
yes.
are just like pop structurally to the bone. But I'm also just an eclectic music listener, and I've always loved, like even in high school, like two of the most important artists for me would have been the Velvet Underground and John Coltrane. So like just like a wide expanse of music, and then being in that area of Los Angeles and wanting to do something. I think the big thing that we always knew that we wanted to do something interesting, and writing like a great song is like, in a traditional sense, it's just been so well done and so documented. I think that we felt that we wanted to try to do something avant-garde and left field and really of the moment, and there was a lot of what we would call free noise, like, which is almost bordering on, it's like fully experimental audio performance arts. It's not songs.
Hmm.
But we were a traditional band, and I'd been getting into sort of more far afield types of music, and by the time we made that first record, it was like, we were focusing on post-punk and like 20th century neoclassical composition, like Steve Reich and John Cage, and like process music, and minimalism and noise, and like, you're young and just full of vim and vigor, and these different aesthetic avenues are so vivid at that point. I think that we were just so galvanized and excited by doing something. And now when I look back on it, I'm like, dude, that record's fucking insane. Like, I can't believe anybody even listened to it. And I can't believe that it's like a no wave record. It's like there's no songs. Oh, excuse me. Let me just have a drink of water here.
Yeah, you're good. You just mentioned there this idea of neoclassical composition, specifically in the context of John Cage. What do you mean when you're talking about that? I've never heard that phrase before. Like, what are some of the hallmarks of that type of composition?
Well, I think that there's, I mean, I could be misusing it, but like 20th century classical composition types, like the stuff that it would have been really influential to me at the time would be like, yeah, like Steve Reich, um, particularly music for 18 musicians, um, early Philip Glass, and then considering how all that is pretty melodic. I mean, the Steve Reich stuff, like the pulse structures are like very, it's like proto-electronic music from the early 20th century, but done with the human voice and with mallet instruments instead of like arpeggiators. And then earlier than that would have been like Stockhausen, like Carlos Stockhausen, which is like a pioneer of 12-tone music, which is, using the 12 tones interchangeably as if there are no modes or keys. So it's like
Ah,
very jarring and amelodic and avant-garde. And so looking at that sort of from a noise music perspective was, and of course during this time it's like I'm trying to figure out how to fucking sing over these songs that have either not rooted in any single key or are shifting, modulating from key to key, and are shifting time signatures. Um, you know, and ultimately, even though we were like basically like a noise underground like punk band, that early music was pretty intellectual. It's very, even though the scene, that's what we loved about the scene in LA, is that people were making incredibly avant-garde experimental music, but with the spirit of punk rock and fun, whereas those same kind of underground noise scenes on the East Coast were like much more academic, like associated with the art world and the gallery scene and like universities. The kind of thing where it's, you know, you'd have someone who, I went to Juilliard or I went to RISD and I did my thesis on like minimalist composition or drone music or things like that.
Got it.
So yeah, it's definitely a pretty atypical entree into like songwriting.
Yeah.
But the songwriting that I did when I was young was much more, you know, the biggest influences on the way I played guitar at an early age were probably like things like Sonic Youth or Johnny Marr. Like not, I wasn't trying to shred or anything like that. And then yeah, there's just been this, maybe to predict where the questions might go, is that I think that part of what we always felt like was it's easier to shift towards writing more traditional songs or delving into melody when you're coming from such an experimental place, that it allows for that kind of evolution, whereas the reverse is rarely, if ever, true, you know? So if you're a band that writes banger fucking hooks and choruses, and then your penchant is to move to being extremely experimental and avant-garde, it's difficult to ask people to follow you there. But you can do that more if you start from like a batshit crazy place.
Right.
You know, like even having a chorus seems revolutionary, but it's not. You're not. People have already done the heaviest lifting they're gonna do. You know what I mean?
As listeners, yes.
Exactly.
Yes. So you're kind of coming from this place. You're in this DIY scene. You're playing music that is very unlikely, frankly, at first to strike a national and international following. And then all of a sudden, from what I can tell, what really changes things for you is you do this remix of Crystal Castle's Crime Wave, and this, as you kind of mentioned it before, like this, the golden glowing eye of the zeitgeist for this moment shines itself on you, and you have this opportunity. What did it feel like when that happened? Because it sounds like from what you're saying right now that even you expected this to be an unlikely entree to like a multi-decade career.
So yeah, it was actually their remix of Crime Wave. But you're absolutely correct. Then that was a moment where we felt, you can feel the zeitgeist moving, especially when you're young. I mean, that's what old people will never understand about young people, is that part of almost the quintessence of the zeitgeist is a preternatural, instinctual, like barometric response to what's new and what's happening without having to articulate it. Having to articulate it sort of is the biggest demarcator of being outside of it, you know? And we were young and in that moment, and we hit up that band on MySpace. It was like, hey, would you want to remix a song? And they sent us the remix, And that was one, like I'm not an A&R person. I'd be a terrible A&R person. My band's really fucking weird. But we heard the song, like he sent it back to us in an email, the remix, and we were like, this is going to be a hit.
No
Like
way. You knew.
whatever hit means back then, it's like the internet. But it was like, it was a fucking global, like you'd hear it everywhere in a bar, in a store, in a fucking clothing store, in a hip neighborhood, in a restaurant, in a whatever. It was just like, it was all over the place. And even though their band like catapulted to sort of like actual stardom, and that kind of timed out at the same time that this shit happened at the Smell anyway. They were like two different things, so it gave us like a double-edged entry into this. All of a sudden we're like, people know who we are, and we're doing interviews, and we're getting to play like festivals. And I think our manager at the time, who was also putting out our records on like a vanity label, he even said something along the lines of our self-titled LP was like, I cannot believe we squeezed like 3+ years of touring out of like 29 minutes of just the most insane gobbledygook experimental music. And it really is just representative of that time and space. Like Pitchfork was fucking king, and they were like incredibly influential. And at that moment, it was sort of the pre-poptimism. Music is cyclical and it's changing all the time. It's like you have this amazing moment now in indie rock where it's like it's all girls, and that's so cool. It's like girls are playing guitars, and it's all these like female power pop like Boy Genius is like the biggest fucking band. But in the era that we came out, it was like there was this, not that it was distinguished male or female, there was this real openness to extremely heady, experimental leaning music.
Yes.
So it was like you had like Animal Collective, which is a weird fucking band, was like one of the biggest indie bands in the world. Played second down from headlining Coachella, and like bands like Dirty Projectors and Tune Yards and all this. People just at that moment were down for some wacky shit, and we were just in the right place. And so it allowed us to sort of jump into all these different spaces. And then, we stuck around long enough for that to evolve into other things as well.
Well, how did you stick around in that sense? Because when lightning in a bottle strikes, a lot of times what it can do with people, particularly young people, is it can expose a lot of earlier flaws. It can break people. It can spiral into a lot of problems. It's actually kind of rare that people are able to take that success and not sabotage themselves with it. How do you think you avoided that pitfall?
Well, I had to get sober. That had to happen.
Oh, wow. Okay. And pretty early on?
No, I wrote it. I had a lot of fun. It wasn't like, like I had a lot of fun for a lot of years. But I think that did ultimately, it was about, I made it about almost like 8 years after the band got to like be a professional band, and then it was just too much. But even lasting almost a decade is hard. I think that there's a couple of things that really were our saving grace in terms of that. And I very much agree. I think that one of the biggest things is that even though we came out of that scene, we never really had a genre. We're not a very easily classifiable band. And that's both a blessing and a curse. And I'll explain what I mean by that. And when you have a genre, whether or not it's punk rock or salsa music or pop music, or hyper pop or whatever, whatever is the de rigueur zeitgeist thing, or something that's timeless like punk rock or garage rock or something that just keeps reperpetuating itself. Or like, you look at the fucking the 80s rebirth has now been going on twice as long as the 80s happened, which is pretty fucking interesting. But what it allows you to do is it allows you to connect immediately with all those people that identify with those genres, and it can catapult your band to a broad spectrum of public awareness.
Yes.
And that is fantastic. However, once that happens, unless you like sort of really leap to the top rungs of that, when that genre, especially if it's a zeitgeist thing, inevitably passes out of focus and fashion, a lot of times you're fucked.
Yes.
You know? And so it's always just been this uphill incremental thing for us to make fans, but we never had a thing where it was like, oh, garage rock is the shit right now, and all these bands are like, we're taking them all for the ride. And then 5 years later, it's like nobody wants to listen to this anymore. No labels want to deal with it. Nobody critically will write about it, and nobody wants to go to those shows. You
Right.
know, that didn't happen because we've just never had.
Yes.
So,
well, because you didn't take the early sugar high of identifying yourself with that, for sure.
And just because I think we're just bad at that. Like we always, you know, even when we like write a song on a record that people really like, we did it with this record even. Like people will be, their expectations will be like, oh, I love that song, so this is what the record sounds like. And we're like, no, there's just one song like that.
Yeah.
I think it comes back to the first records we made. We always wanted everything to be so diverse that we would be like, well, we can't write another one like that because we already wrote one like that. And with a little bit of perspective, I see now how insane that is, because it's not like, it's like Nirvana, Nevermind, you know, it's just like, no, we can't have another banger ass song. We already wrote one. It's like, you know what people like is they like the same shit if it's good, you know?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
And then the other big thing that kept us out of it was, kept us alive was around 2011, early 2011, or late 2010. We got contacted by Rockstar Games, who do, you know, it's Grand Theft Auto and Red Dead Redemption. Like, you know, Grand Theft Auto is the biggest intellectual property in history.
It's massive. It dwarfs.
It
dwarfs. If you ever look at the numbers of just like sheer how much the video game industry brings in versus the music industry, dwarfs it. Dwarfs it. It's amazing.
I think Grand Theft Auto is worth many times over the entire music industry, which is like including Drake and fucking Taylor, you know, all that. It's insane. So, you know, out of nowhere, we're just this underground noise band. We had just put out our second record, and that company got in contact with us, and we ended up scoring an entire video game title for them. Like,
you did Max Payne, right?
Yeah, Max Payne 3. And it took like, talk about being thrown into the deep end professionally of being accountable for like a volume of work and a level of work. Like, it really made us, it was like a trial by fire as being proficient in your craft of writing music, because we had to generate many hours more music than we had ever written in our career up until that point. And you know, then it ended up being, I thought it was weird at the time. Now when I look back on it, I can't believe that they had the faith in us to do that, because we were legitimately like a fucking warehouse like noise band. And you know, that millions and millions of people played that game. So we got this exposure to the mainstream that connected us also to gaming culture, and that completely changed. That's like one of those left turn things that you could just never anticipate. You know, like I can make like some 3D chess move kind of things, like, hey, like our music is really more like industrial music. I feel like the heavy music community would embrace us. I want to experiment with like getting them to know us, and that works, you know?
Yes.
Like, we've done that successfully, but the gaming thing, like, we could have never guessed that that was going to happen, and it just changed. And at the time, it was interesting because that world that we came out of, this sort of pitchfork indie rock world, even though we were never an indie rock band, there was a lot of skepticism and suspicion of doing something like that. You know, that was still an era when it was like, oh, you had a song on a McDonald's commercial.
Oh,
That's
I
lame.
remember. Yep. It
Yeah.
used to not be cool. It wasn't that long ago, man, that you could, well, not exactly get canceled, but people would be very upset if you had anything
It was
to
a
do with that.
different version of cancellation. Yeah. Cancellation is such a
Yeah.
polarized, but I know exactly what you mean.
You know
Yeah.
what?
It was like, you'd be like, you jumped the fucking shark. It was
Yes.
like, I mean, I remember Beach House, who like are friends of mine. I thought they were insane, and now, and you know what? They just got bigger and bigger and bigger, and are like a fucking legacy band and deserve all of
Hmm.
it. But it's like, I remember they passed on a Volkswagen Super Bowl ad
Oh my gosh.
in the mid aughts, and it was like, I
Wow.
just remember thinking like, holy shit, that's crazy. But they were kind of that school of like, dude, our music is serious. We take it seriously. We're not a commodity.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because now that's just such a antiquated idea, just because of the way everything has been co-opted anyway by TikTok and Instagram, and like
Yeah.
it's just all,
I
you
mean, they
can't
even
really.
changed the name of what we do now. They call it content now. Like it's
Yeah,
literally like it's a term that you classify product and merchandise with, you know?
yeah. I
Uh,
mean, and that's one of the hardest things. It's like, well, we need, we the music is good, but we need. I mean, you look at fucking major labels and shit now. It's like they want pre-existing content stars
mhm.
before they sign you for your music.
Yes.
You could have great music, and they're like, yeah, but like, what are their YouTube subscriber numbers look like? Like, what are their TikTok like?
Yeah.
Because it's like, I mean, it's great in a way that there's like this egalitarian, who knows what the fuck is going on, Wild West moment, but at the same time, there's no gatekeepers except for algorithms.
Yeah.
So, yeah, for us, man, that I think is the real thing that saved us, was the video game thing.
Well, talk to me about this. So this podcast is about a lot of different things, but we often try to drill down on the songwriting part of it. I'm really interested. You're these scrappy upstarts who are you've come out of this DIY world. All of a sudden, you've been asked to score this entire video game, and like you said, number one, you're coming up to the big leagues. In a way, it is like scoring a Super Bowl commercial, except like a many hours of music. On a granular level, how did you sit down and begin to compose for that? And how did it differ from your process from before? I mean, it had to be very different than the way that you had written records before.
It was extremely different. It was an incredible amount of work. And one of the great things about being young and being in a band is like you kind of get to be a shitbag. I mean, that's the tightest thing about being a musician, is that like sometimes you got to work like really hard for short bursts, but compared to other creative disciplines, like people that I know, like I've been in LA for over half my life now, and I know a lot of people that work in either production or post production. It's like to thrive in that creative space, like you are used to just this grueling, like 15-hour days on set. It's like, oh, the edit deadline is next week. It's like, I'm gonna work 100-hour work week or
Yeah.
whatever kind of thing. And the music industry, it's just like, you get a bunch of young people. It's like they made a record, and it's like, and then they just go out and tour and then party and have fun, and like you play a show for 55 minutes or whatever.
Yep.
It's
Yep.
the best.
It's a good
And
job.
yeah, it is. It's the best job. Like,
Yes.
um, it might not be the best job for making money because it's based on a system that is, it's like built into it to screw you over, just but from the antiquate, from the
Hmm.
pre Beatles, sort of, when the idea of a publishing catalog existing beyond a year or two, it's like everything is just set up to cost you a bunch of money and kind of like screw you over. But in terms of the actual uh boots on the ground, it's so much fun.
That's great.
And yeah, so so this was like just a lot of work, and thankfully our so the relationship we have with the music department, with Rockstar Games in general, but particularly the music department, um it's like it's so counter to what you would imagine a company on that scale with entertainment properties that are the biggest in history.
Mm-hmm.
It's like two fucking guys in an office and who are like deep lovers of music, and particularly one guy who is like family to us now, this many years on, and they're just like incredibly eclectic, tasteful listeners of music. There's no Eventually they got to do listening sessions with a bunch of like the big dogs, but like it's a sort of a family run top down company where the head guy is like incredibly involved in everything, and he is a music head, so they have a direct it's not like a Marvel movie where, you know, you've got like some 26-year-old executive that is going to give you notes that doesn't know anything about music. So in that way, it was who would have, I mean, I guess when you think about it, it makes total sense, right? It's like only a company like that would have let some crazy assholes like us do a score for something that big.
Yes.
You know, because the music was like, it's dark, it's like gritty and avant-garde and strange, and it takes people who really love and care about music to hear that and then watch it with the footage and be like, this is great, rather than just having a bunch of people in a room be like, shouldn't it be more like blah blah blah, you know, whatever thing that's happening right now. I heard this
Yes.
Kanye song on the radio, maybe it could be more like that, you know, like that kind of shit. And
Yeah.
and so in that way, even though there was like this huge learning curve with the like, okay, we need to write music like daily and we need to break it down into these STEM systems, and just like be accountable to notes and the way that the visual material could be changing. There at least was this rapport between us and the people we were working with, where they understood a lot of things, that at the time we probably would have taken for granted, like references and like, oh hey, it's like this track is kind of like this Factory Records artist, and the guy I'm talking to knows exactly who I'm talking about. You know, like that's not necessarily going to happen if you're working on some other huge gaming title.
What you said something there that kind of piqued my attention. What were the STEM systems that you had to break it into for them to use?
So, you know, video game technology is always evolving, and I think now they've even gotten even far more complex and sophisticated. But you know, you remember you're a kid, like you play a game and it's like whatever level has that song, and that's the level of song. So when we were working on Max Payne 3, they had really just started shifting into this like multi-stem system where you'd be composing. I think we weren't going past 6 at that time. Um, Now it evolved even more, and I think now it's probably some proprietary shit that I don't even understand, and if I did, I wouldn't be allowed to talk about. But so basically, like when you think about stems broken down for like remixes or like
Mm-hmm.
radio edits or something, you would group them with like instruments, you know. So you'd have drum stems, vocal stems, guitar stems, or something like that. These didn't work like that. It was any number of stems. Like a guitar and a synth layer and a percussive layer could all be on one stem,
Mm-hmm.
and they're triggered by the coding in the game. You know, so
That's so cool.
if you're walking down a hallway and it's a suspense cue, it's like maybe there's just like a droney ambient synth playing, and then all of a sudden some guys are trying to kill you and it's a run and gun situation, like you're going to cue other things. And the way that they needed to interact was they didn't necessarily all have to play at the same time, but most of them did. So they have to be all in the same tempo and in the same key per level. And we actually realized after about doing 2 or 3 levels, we were like, oh, fuck this. Everything is in the same key. Everything is just
the whole thing. Yeah.
like, because we're just like, we have to write so much music. It's just like, it's all in C minor. That's it. Like,
Yeah.
I don't want to have to think about, like, I want to be so quick with my hands on a guitar or on a keyboard that I'm just like, I'm in C minor, And then if I want to go somewhere new, like if we pick a level, then it's going to feel subconsciously to the player like really disparate. It'll really stand out. So if you want to do something sort of triumphant and you modulate to a major key, or even do a key like A minor that's less dark than C minor, it's very noticeable, and it just made the workflow a lot more digestible to just be able to be efficient. So there was a lot of things like that we sort of learned in the
What
process.
did you end up taking with you? I mean, this must have been pretty formative to you as a songwriter. What did you end up taking with you back to Health and your more kind of personal projects?
It was hugely informative. I don't think that there's any other way that it could have been. And we, recently had a similar experience of doing all these collaborative records that had a big effect on us as well. But I think the biggest thing probably was, as I said before, just having to grow up so much in terms of, not to like hit on some pop culturally kind of Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours shit, but it was like, we had to like woodshed in a way that was very substantial, and we just learned like a lot of production tricks and a lot of in experimenting and trying to find new textures. It was eye-opening, and it just expanded our musical palette so much because we couldn't just like you're making way more music than would even be for a 3-hour film.
Right.
It was like we ended up making like 5-6 hours of music, and it had to be disparate. It couldn't just be like the same thing over and over again. It's like you want to be aiding the visual experience. It's like one thing is taking place in an urban setting during the daytime, and this is at night in a jungle, and it's raining, and all, the same way that I'm a big cinephile, and so the way we were looking at it was like we're scoring to a film. That's just, and in a lot of ways, for a lot of not even just young people, but people in general now, like games have supplanted film culture in terms of like, and so I think that just really catalyzed our breadth of experience, the depth of it as writers, and in a way that like a lot of bands that were our age at that time, just, it's not they wouldn't have been capable of that growth. It was just they weren't thrown into the deep end the way we were with that. And by the time we came out of the other side of it, it was like we were just far more sophisticated in terms of as writers.
Well, and they weren't thrown in the deep end, but not for nothing. It was also an opportunity that you said yes to, whereas where we discussed a moment earlier, like a lot of bands maybe wouldn't have said yes to it because it wasn't cool enough for them, or it didn't fit like their view, their narrative of who they were as an artist. But you guys said yes to it, and it changed you.
I mean, ultimately, the thing that's so funny is that as we've continued being a band, we've found that like a couple of years ago, like 3-4 years ago, we were doing this collab, like instead of a record of remixes, we were doing collaborations, and our manager was like, hey, I'm going to, I want you guys to try to work with JPEG Mafia or like Ghostmain or 100 Gex, like these bands that are like very like cool, of the moment, tapped into youth culture. And we're like, dude, these fucking guys aren't going to know who we are, like they're not going to want, and like they all knew us from Max Payne 3. Right. And that's how we ended up it's actually what kept our career vital and in the present, was that we. So it's so ironic how that kind of stuff works, right?
Yeah.
You could over pitchfork yourself and be like, oh man, that's kind of lame. Like video games,
Right.
like so many
Right.
of those kids that were from those bands, they're like, I went to Brown. I don't want to do with it. I mean,
Right. Well, but there you
some
go. I mean, you started talking about earlier how what you didn't like about that East Coast scene was the over intellectualized part of it. And you also said something earlier that I thought was really interesting. You were talking about the zeitgeist, and if you have to articulate it or intellectualize it, by definition, that means that you're outside of it. So you guys have just kind of intuitively gone forward without that. Before I let you go, there's another collaboration I wanted to talk to you about, because I think from the outside looking in, it looks like it's been very formative for you as a writer. You've had a very long time relationship, touring wise and creatively, with Trent Reznor and Nine Inch Nails. And when you guys first got tapped to open for Nine Inch Nails is not exactly the type of band that goes to their agent and says, "Give us the hottest band at William Morris." Right now, they curate who comes on the road with them pretty intensely.
I
They
mean,
brought you.
he's intensely involved in everything he does.
Okay,
So
well
yeah.
there you go. So can you describe that first meeting and kind of that first tour that you were on with them, how that came together and what it was like to try to perform at a level like that?
Yeah, I mean, that was another one. That was before the gaming score, where it was another like, what the fuck? How is this happening? Because the only record we had out was that insane first self-titled,
Hmm.
and I think that just comes down to, yeah, Trent Reznor is just, he's a very adroit historian of underground aggressive music, and he just has his barometer and taste level is very um wide ranging. And yeah, he is involved with who he wants to bring on tour, and what he wants to, how he keeps the legacy of his band relevant. And obviously his career has had like like the scoring, the revitalization, and the depth that his career has sort of taken on now. Who could have seen that coming? He's got 2 Academy Awards. Like, he's
Yeah.
halfway to a fucking EGOT or whatever.
Right.
Which you wouldn't have foreseen with, like, I Want to Fuck You Like an Animal video.
Exactly.
You can't really guess these things. But yeah, that was crazy. All of a sudden we're like on and from the very first day, you're like, and I know a lot of people that have done a lot of big tours, and it's like, sometimes you don't meet anybody. You're
Yes.
just there as a functionary because it's part of the ritual that there's an opening band.
Yep.
And a lot of times the approach to that is to like treat you almost like a sacrificial lamb. It's like, oh, we don't even want it to be good. We want you to serve as a way to make people like more excited to see the opener because you're
Yeah.
not good. And that's not at all like, from the first day we showed up, it was like, right when we got there, it was like, hey, stay right here. Trent wants to meet you. And then
Wow.
it was, honored to have you on tour. If anybody gives you any shit, let me know. I'll fire them, kind of thing. Like,
Wow.
I think that he's just cultivated that. Like, he's been in the game long enough to, like, obviously I never compare myself, but I remember taking from that, like, if you got to that level, like, that's how you want to be with young people that are new to the industry, to sort of,
Yes.
to give them, to show them that there's like respect and like a way to operate. And fuck, dude, I don't know why. He and I aren't close enough. Like, we're not, like, we don't hang out on the weekends. I don't call him, but we've
Right.
maintained this enough of, like, the reason we were able to do a collaborative track together over a decade after that was because I knew that there was enough mutual respect that, like, I could just email him and ask him if he wanted to do it. And if he didn't want to
Yes.
do it and had the time to respond to me, he would. And if he was too busy to respond, he wouldn't. But I would never be like, he's going to think I was out of line trying to contact him. That's just not
Yes.
the vibe. And so it was crazy having to play arena shows at that level. But then we were very much in contact, and then we did shows again together later, and then out of nowhere, years ago, he contacted us and was like, "Hey, my producer Alan Mulder is going to be in town. If you guys have a song, I think you should do it in my home studio with him."
Wow.
And that was just like out of nowhere, for free, on his, and I've never asked him this, but I feel like must have always just been something that he saw in us creatively or musically that he liked and respected and wanted to see us grow and succeed. So that's
Yeah.
how we kind of have kept. And ultimately, I think that that's another one of those things that has allowed our band to have an additional life to it. Is that many years on being able to say like, hey, we did a song with Nine Inch Nails,
Yeah.
um, that sort of changed the arc of, I think, just how, I wouldn't use the word legacy with us, but like how our body of work is looked at. I think it gives it another perspective.
It's funny with huge artists like that. You mentioned how detailed, how he was keyed into all the details. I find that to be pretty durable with people who get to that level. It's always the people that you most expect to have no time to answer your emails. They get back to you in like 4 hours. And then the folks who are absolutely doing nothing never write back to your emails. But people like that, I mean, they're keyed in. I hear stories about Dylan, even at the age that he's at now. If he goes to play the pageant in St. Louis, he knows what all the deal points are when his tour manager goes to settle. Even now, he doesn't need money.
I
You know
mean,
what I mean? But
working the limited amount of time we've had to work with Trent, that's something that I will definitely say that I took from it, is that like how incredibly seriously he takes all the work that he does. And like you said, we did 2 albums worth of collaborations, and there was no, and they may or may not know this, but there was no collaboration we did that had more communication and more back and forth than the one with Nine Inch Nails. And it's like, it's not like anybody else could have been more busy. He's also got 5 fucking kids. You know what
that's
I
it.
mean?
That's it.
It's just show, and it's a blueprint for you. It's like, yeah, there's some huge things that have to happen, like having like an iconic voice and a incredible musical talent, and like that's really important. But not to be trite, but the whole like 99% perspiration, 1% inspiration thing, it's like when you spend a little time around it, you take from it like, you know what else is really important? Fucking working. Like working. Like diligently.
Yes.
Doing your work.
Yes.
And Dylan's a great reference. Like look at that the crazy outpouring of him in the middle 60s. It's like all he did was he would just sit at a typewriter for hours and hours and hours, like every day, and just write songs.
Yes.
It
Yes.
wasn't like hey, I'm already hot shit, I just want to go out and like be cool,
Yeah. And frankly, even like the last 30 years, there's so many artists who've had lifelong careers where you'll look at like their Spotify and you're like, oh, look, there was like a 9-year period where like they just didn't release anything. And that makes sense. You get older. Not him, man. Like the last 30 years, it hasn't been like the middle 60s, but he's always been putting stuff out. So
I think it's probably one of those things that, I don't know how much time we have left, but that is one thing that I will say that's been hugely notable for me as I've gotten older, is that my relationship with the life cycle of like making a record and putting it out and touring has really shifted. Whereas I used to feel like the writing and specifically recording a record was sort of the eating your vegetables. And then the dessert was, okay, I get to go out on the road and tour and have fun and party and meet interesting people. And now it's completely inverse
switched.
for me.
Yeah.
And it's like what I live for is the creative process of making a record. And that's always what I'm looking forward to. And I'm really trying to get away from this semi arbitrary cycle that we have in the music industry, where it's like you have these designations of time of creativity, and then it's like, okay, now you're done making a record, so now just go out on tour. And it's like, man, when you like finish making a record, like that's when you're most in the zone for writing. That's when you're most attuned. And honestly, like the best thing would be to just keep writing. And then we all stop for like 2 or 3 years. And
Right.
I feel like that's like so creatively stunting. And it's something that I'm really trying to get away from, is trying to figure out how to not get off that carousel, because it's like anything else, anybody else, even in the most pedestrian of pursuits that we all understand. It's like you start eating, like, I'm eating paleo and really clean. I've been doing CrossFit, blah, blah, blah,
Yeah.
whatever thing it is. It's like once you fucking stop, it's hard to start again. But when you're in it, that momentum is perpetuating. And I think that, like, with creativity, like, it's not that there's no such thing as writer's block, but the best way to make your work disparate and grow is to just have the discipline to continue pursuing it. And having, like, it's not like just volume matters, but I think staying connected to that creative process is really important, and that's what I look forward to now.
Well, man, to be honest, I could talk with you about this stuff for a couple hours. It's been really illuminating rapping with you, but you're on the road right now. You're on tour, so we appreciate your time that you've given us already, and we'll let you go. With that, Jake from Hell, thanks so much for being a part of the Working Songwriter.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, man. I appreciate it.